Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Luis Gomez. Pronouns are he, his, him, and I'm one of the 3 program managers at Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. With us today, we also have Dan McLaughlin, program manager, and India Pierre Ingram, senior program associate. Once again, thank you all for making it today, and we thank you for being with us during this time. We hope that all of you are safe and healthy throughout this pandemic. This is our first virtual webinar. We haven't ever done this, but moving forward, we've decided to do all in-person gatherings, including program workshops online through Zoom. So we might have some technical difficulties, some issues, so we thank you for your patience as we experiment with this format. Dan will be navigating the webinar, so if you hear me say next slide, that is why. So let's get started. Dan, can you to the next slide? During today's webinar, we'll cover who CAC is, what we do, how we do it, share information about what funding opportunities are accepting applications this summer, an overview of CAC's application process, including key dates and steps from our guidelines, a brief overview of the application system we use for all of our grants, answer any questions you might have, which we will do at the end of the presentation. I would also like to see who is with us today. If you could please introduce yourself, just your name and the organization you are representing through our chat room function. If you are calling in, unfortunately, that function is not available. And you want to make sure when you're writing your introduction that you are emailing it to everyone and not just the CAC host. Perfect. All right. Great. Thank you. I'm always interested to see all the types of arts and culture programming that is taking place throughout Cuyahoga County. So I'm glad to see that there's some familiar faces, or I should say some familiar names, as well as some new names, which we're excited about. With that, I'm going to share some information about Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, which I may reference as CAC throughout the presentation. If any questions come up throughout the presentation, please message them directly to CAC host. When you go into the chat box, you will see that as an opportunity. However, if for some reason you email it to everyone, I will take note of that as well. Next slide. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture is a public funder of arts and culture in Cuyahoga County. We are a political subdivision of the state of Ohio, and our footprint is Cuyahoga County. Cuyahoga County residents created Cuyahoga Arts and Culture in 2016 when they approved a tax on cigarettes to support arts and culture in our community. The levy was renewed in 2015 and now runs until 2026. Our mission is to inspire and strengthen the community in investing in arts and culture. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture achieves this mission by investing in 501c3 arts and culture organizations and projects in Cuyahoga County through 2 main grants programs. Our first one is general operating support, and the second one is project support. Since 2006, we've been invested more than $150 million in arts and cultural organizations and activities across this county. This year, CAC is investing in over $12 million through grants to organizations who bring arts and culture to life in our community, including $1.6 million to over 200 organizations receiving project support funding, and then $2.2 million to another 65 organizations receiving general operating support. It's through these investments that we work to realize CAC's vision that every resident can experience a meaningful cultural life. Next slide. Outside of these 2 primary grant programs, CAC also has several additional ways that we are investing in arts and culture in our community. Some are other grants programs, and most are in partnerships with other funders or organizations. The first one is Center for Performance and Civic Practice Learning Lab. This program is currently closed, and matches have already been made with individual artists and organizations to create civic-based arts projects within our community, but we do want to reference and mention it. We also co-fund arts and culture community-based projects through Neighborhood Connections. I believe their next application deadline will be in August. However, that might change based on the current COVID-19 pandemic. We provide up to $3,000 in matching funds through In Our Backyards, or also known as IOB, which is a nonprofit fundraising platform for arts and culture-based projects within our community. CAC is unable to directly support individual artists. However, we are able to support artists through partnerships with nonprofits through our Support for Artists Grants program. Currently, Karamu House and Spaces is accepting applications. For more information on any of these programs, please check out our website. Even if your organization is not eligible for project support or general operating support next year, one of these opportunities may still work for you. Next slide. Here are a few pictures from some of the events and activities that have been supported in part by CAC funding through the past few years. We'll get into specifics about the eligibility requirements later, but many of the organizations receiving CAC funding do not have a primary mission of arts and culture, but are doing amazing arts and culture programming throughout this county. Grant recipients, including community development corporations, after-school programs, and mental health agencies, are all receiving CAC funds, as well as organizations that are focusing only on arts and culture programming. It is important to point out that CAC's definition of arts and culture, which is based on the Ohio Revised Code, includes natural science. This means we fund science and nature-based programming in addition to other disciplines like music, performing arts, and visual arts. And so we hope with this slide, you're able to see the variety of arts and culture programming that we're able to offer throughout this county. Next slide. We want to pivot a little bit and talk about one of our values, which is equity. CAC claimed equity as an organizational value, specifically racial equity in 2008. Equity is defined as a fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement of all people, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of groups. Equity is a separate, targeted treatment in order to meet the needs of those marginalized. Equity relates to strategies that are needed to impact institutional barriers. Equity is a process, a practice, and an outcome. We've been doing our own internal learning and programmatic adjustments, and we've been offering opportunities for our grant recipients to learn along with us. In the past 2 years, CAC has covered the cost of over 320 people to attend the racial equity workshops through Third Space Action Lab. We are hoping to continue this offer, but at the moment it is paused as no in-person trainings or conferences are able to happen. You can find more information on our website, including our Power of Words video and our racial equity language video, by visiting cacgrants.org/equity. Next slide. And as you all know, we are currently going through a pandemic. As a response to the coronavirus pandemic, 2020 PS project support funded projects that have been canceled or postponed by COVID-19 and related closures can extend their 2020 project timeline through 2021 by effectively transferring their 2020 grant to next year. If applicants decide to extend their grant, they will not be required to apply for 2021 funding. We have also additional flexibility for impacted projects thanks to our CAC approved changes to the 2020 grant agreements. If you are a current grant recipient and you're interested in doing this, please contact your program manager for more information. Next slide. So let's get back to the grant programs that will be available this summer for applications. There are 2 levels of project support grants. They have different eligibility criteria, different application requirements, and different grant amounts. For Project Support 1, you must have received funding from CAC within the last 4 years. Therefore, if you're a first-time applicant, you are not eligible to apply for this program. Within Project Support 1, organizations can request a $25,000. However, most organizations won't be eligible to request that much. Applicants can request no more than half of your project's total budget. So for example, if your arts and culture project's budget is $30,000, the most that you can request your project support one is $15,000. Organizations will also need to complete their SMU Data Arts Cultural Data Profile, which is data related to your organization's arts and culture programming. I will say that out of all the requirements for project support one, completing the data arts cultural data profile is one of the things that's the most complicated and time consuming. So if you are interested in applying for project support one, we recommend working on that right away. For project support two, it is open to both new and past applicants. You can request up to $5,000 per organization. Similar to PS1, applicants cannot request more than half of your project's total budget. Both grants are matching grants, which means grant amounts you receive must be matched. For project support two, 50% of your matching funds can be in-kind donations. That is not applicable for project support one. For project support two, it is also a much simpler application than project support one, and then you're also more likely to receive full funding through project support two. I would also like to know that we are currently not accepting applications for general operating support. This program will be available next year for applications. And if you have questions about general operating support, please contact a program manager. Next slide. For organizations to be eligible to apply for CAC funding, they must meet the following criteria. They must have a permanent and viable base of operations in Cuyahoga County for at least 1 year, have presented an arts and culture program open to the public within previous 2 years, and are registered as a charitable organization with the Ohio Secretary of State, as well as be as a registered 501c3 nonprofit. If you have any questions about this eligibility criteria, please ask them and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So let's talk about what a project is. So a project must be a single event or a series of related events with a strong connecting theme. So for example, if you are applying for a project that has a variety of performances, there has to be a theme that connects all those performances. One that I can think of right away is Convergence Continuum, which is a local theater company. They come in for funding for 3 plays, and the theme for those 3 plays is Rise and Revolt, talking about the political climate in today's current time. So that is a strong theme that connects all those 3 performances. Your project also must start and end in 2021. However, planning can take place in 2020. CAC funds cannot cover any expenses related to anything that happened in 2020. As defined by the Ohio Revised Code, if your project is an arts and culture, your application will be deemed eligible and you will be notified. Program managers review all the applications prior to sending them off to panelists. And so if your project is not arts and culture, you will be deemed ineligible. Your project has to be open to the public. Open to the public doesn't mean free. So there could be a cost associated with your project. Public just means that the community that you are serving has to be aware of that project itself. Some of your project components can be outside of Cuyahoga County. So if you have like a variety of performances, a few of them could be in Menor or Akron. However, expenses from your CAC, funds from your CAC grant cannot go to those specific performances. All right. Another thing we want to mention during this time, open also means that it could be online or virtual or streaming. We anticipate that a lot of programming will move online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is more than okay as a project, as long as your community, which you are able to define, is aware of it, would be more than okay. If you have any other questions about virtual or online programming, please let us know. It is also something new that we're experiencing, but we're excited to see what arts and culture projects will come out of this. And with that, I will move it over to my colleague, Dan, who will do the next part of the presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Luis, and hi, everybody. I'm Dan McLaughlin. As Luis said, I'm one of the other program managers and somebody that you might be working with throughout the application period, or you might be working with Luis or Heather, and you'll definitely be working with my colleague India, who will be on next. The next thing I want to talk about is some of the specific funding restrictions that we have in place for project support grants. CSE funds can be used for most project expenses, but there are a few things, those items that are listed on your screen, that are not eligible for project support grants. So some of the ones that come up most frequently are questions about some of the ones that come up the most frequently are food and beverage, tuition and scholarships, and things like that. Those are allowed to be part of your project. We're not saying that you can't do those things, but we are saying that the CAC portion of the funds that goes towards those is not able to go towards those specific costs. So because it is a matching program, those costs could be covered through other sources, through other income, but CAC funds can't be used for those items. And there's a full list in the guidelines, so make sure you take a look at those as you're getting into the actual application. And if you have questions, you can always reach out. All right, so Luis kind of touched on this a little bit, but as you're considering which project, or I'm sorry, which grant program to apply for, you're going to want to think about what's the amount that you can request. For project support 2, it's pretty straightforward. It's up to $5,000, remembering, of course, that match requirement. So if you are requesting $5,000, that means that your project needs to have total expenses of at least $10,000. You don't need to request the full 5. You can request, we have some organizations that request only 1,000, 1,500, based on what the needs of their specific project are. For project support 1, as Luis mentioned, it is a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more involved process. The maximum request is up to $25,000, but most organizations applying for project support 1 are not going to be eligible for that maximum amount. In short, as Luis mentioned, it's 15% of your organization's eligible arts and cultural expenses. You'll see the formula on your screen there that sort of breaks down how we calculate that. And it goes back to another thing that Luis already mentioned, the Data Arts Funder Report. So we will assess the arts and cultural expenses of an organization by looking at a specific line on that Data Arts Funder Report, the expenses less in-kind line. And then we will also back out any CAC funding that your organization received in that fiscal year to come to what we call the eligible arts and cultural expenses. You take 15% of that amount, and that's the maximum amount that your organization could request in project support 1. For some, it's that cap of 25,000. For others, that doesn't quite get to 25,000. So we share this formula with you, and it's also printed in the guidelines so that you can sort of do this estimate ahead of time to help you figure out which program it makes the most sense to apply for. And we'll also be happy to walk through that estimate or calculating what that amount might be if you have questions or if you're unsure. The other thing I want to say about arts and cultural expenses, Luis mentioned that these grants are open to organizations that have a primary mission of arts and culture and organizations that might have a different mission. If your organization has a primary mission of arts and culture, we would say that the total expenses of your organization are all arts and cultural expenses. If your organization that has a different mission, there might be some specific line items that you need to pull out to get to what your arts and cultural expenses are. And that's all figured out through the Data Arts Funder Report. All right, so what is the best fit for your organization, Project Support 1 or Project Support 2? Couple things to consider, and I think the first one would be for current grantees, and I'm not sure how many folks who are on the webinar here today are currently receiving a 2020 project support grant from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, but we'd ask you to consider if your organization has a currently funded project that's been disrupted or impacted by COVID-19. As Luis mentioned, we have some additional flexibility, including the option to just to extend your current grant through next year, kind of in effect transferring that grant to next year and bypassing the application process. So if it looks like you have a project this year that is CSC funded that's not going to be able to be carried out, that is an option, and that may be the best fit for your organization, is to extend it to next year. Other things to consider if you are going ahead with the application process this year: has your organization received project support funding from CAC in the past, and specifically in the past 4 years? Project Support 1 requires that your organization has received at least one project support grant in the past, and that project support grant has been in the past 4 years. Another question to ask is, what's the size or the budget of your organization? Relating back to that formula to calculate the maximum grant amount, is it going to be worthwhile applying for Project Support 1? We've run through that formula with some organizations who go through all the extra effort of doing the Data Arts Funder report, which Luis mentioned is time intensive, and it comes to they can apply for $6,000. The question you'll have to ask yourself, is it worth it for your organization to do that extra amount of work for another $1,000 if you just requested $5,000 without doing all that effort in Project Support 2? So those are the questions that you want to be on your mind. Similarly, what's the mission of your organization? Remember, primarily arts and cultural organizations will be able to consider their whole budget arts and cultural expenses. Those with other missions will have to do a little bit more effort to figure out which of their expenses are arts and cultural, and that number would be smaller. And then lastly, which we kind of alluded to already, is what is your organization's capacity in terms of staff or volunteer time? Do you have folks who are able to take on the more intensive Project Support 1 application process, or is the more simplified Project Support 2 process the best fit for your organization, considering its capacity and considering time? All right, so what is the process? Got our timeline here, and the first important date to keep in mind is the deadline for the eligibility check, which is coming up on June 25th. That is the first deadline, and every organization that's going to apply, whether you're a first-time applicant or if you're returning, is required to submit an eligibility check. Previously, if you've been through our application process before, you may recall our eligibility check was due usually in late May. We've pushed it back a month just due to COVID and making sure that folks have time they need to get together their materials to submit and complete that eligibility check. The eligibility check, after you submit it, we'll process and review it, and we'll determine whether or not your organization is eligible to apply for a project support grant and submit a full application. If you're applying for Project Support 1, at that time we'll also let you know what your maximum request amount is. It does take a few weeks for us to process that and get that information back to you, so we do encourage you to complete that eligibility check as soon as you are able to, and give yourself as much time as possible for that application period. Beyond that, the application would be due in early August, August 6th. You'll see the date there. All of our grants are reviewed by a panel, both Project Support 1 and Project Support 2, which will be in October of this year. Previously, our Project Support 1 grants were reviewed by an in-person panel. We are making plans to conduct that online, like so many other things this year. And our Project Support 2 grants have always been reviewed by an online panel. So, but they are as public as we can make them. The feedback that our panelists have on your application and their deliberations is there for you to access and hear or read. And we do make sure that you have that as well as a tool for your organization to understand why your application was reviewed as it was, why it was scored as it was, and how you can do improve for future applications. Because those are also all public record, if there's any panel reviews or any previous applications that you want to take a look at from any other organizations or even from your own, if you're a new person applying for the first time for your organization, we have those. They're all public record, and we'd be happy to make those available for you. And then finally, our grants aren't official until our board votes to approve them, which will be in November this year. Okay. So a little bit about that eligibility check. So once you log into Fluid Review, our online application system, you'll complete the eligibility check. And honestly, a lot of folks, it doesn't take too long in Fluid Review. The amount of time that you need to spend completing it is pretty straightforward. It's not a whole lot more than some of the technical stuff there. You'll see the requirements on your screen there. For both Project Support 1 and Project Support 2, you'll need to upload a financial document, which for most organizations is going to be your 990. Some larger organizations, meaning if you have expenses that are over $750,000, would be required to submit an audit. But for most, it's going to be the 990. I do want to point out that for Project Support 1, we cannot accept a 990N. It's the postcard, sometimes it's referred to, but we can accept that 990N for Project Support 2. The reason is Project Support 1, we need to verify expenses, and the 990N does not include any kind of verifiable expenses or other financial figures on it. I also want to point out this table here indicates 2019 fiscal year data, but if you do not have 2019 fiscal year data available, 2018 is fine. The IRS has extended their filing deadlines for individuals and for organizations. So if for whatever reason you don't have 2019 available, you can use 2018. For both Project Support 1 and Project Support 2, if you have not been funded in the past 2 years by CAC, you'll need to upload some evidence of recent arts and cultural programming, meaning something that your organization has produced in the past 2 years. In a lot of cases, this is something like a flyer, or could be a link to a social media post, which are great because they have dates and photos and things like that built right into them. There's also an opportunity if you're uploading photos to explain what that programming was. But part of our requirements, as Louise covered earlier, are that your organization has a history of producing arts and cultural programming, and this is how you demonstrate that to us. And then finally, again, just for Project Support 1, not for Project Support 2, is that data arts cultural data profile, the funder report, for preferably the 2019 year, but again, just like with the 990 and fiscal year information, if you don't have 2019 available, 2018 is going to be okay. But that's required to be uploaded at the time of the eligibility check for Project Support 1 only. A little bit more about that data arts funder report. You'll see the address there at the top, www.culturaldata.org. This is a separate system from CAC. We don't maintain it, we don't run it, we don't own it. It's a separate organization. It's actually a national organization that collects data from arts organizations all across the country. As I mentioned, we prefer the one that has, we prefer a funder report and data that has 2019 fiscal year data, but if that's unavailable, 2018 is going to be fine. Luis did mention that this is probably the most time-intensive part of the application process, or at least for the eligibility process for Project Support 1 organizations. I do want to point out that they have their own help desk, they have their own customer support, and by all accounts, it's been really helpful for folks who need technical assistance, either getting into the reporting system or have questions about how to enter data into it. And that's all available at their website. You'll see at the top there, culturaldata.org. But essentially, the funder report contains programmatic and financial data for however many years you're able to put it in there. For organizations that have done it for years and years, you'll see multiple years reflected on your funder report. For organizations that are doing it for the first time, you might only see 1 year, and that's okay for our purposes. But you do want to make sure, if you're doing it, just to make sure that it's accurate, review it after it's completed and make sure that you get it to us in a finalized version, not a draft version. It will carry forward for Project Support 1 applicants to your application, so our panelists will be seeing what you submit to us at the time of the eligibility check. Okay, and I think with that, I am going to hand it over to my colleague India to talk about Fluid Review.
Oh. Hello? Okay. Hi everyone, my name is India Pear Ingram. I'm the Senior Associate at Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, and I'm a manager of the Fluid Review site. So as you can see on the screen, Fluid Review is our online application and reporting system. So this is the same system you'll be using through the eligibility check application stage. It is also where the panelists will review your application, and it is also the space where you will, if you're approved for a grant, will be reporting. The site is really easy to use, and if you have, or you are a previous grantee for 2020 or prior to that, from between 2018 to 2020, you will have an account most likely on Fluid Review. If you have recently acquired your position at an organization who is receiving CEC funding, please reach out to me and I'll make you the primary owner of the account in Fluid Review. Don't create a new account for yourself because that makes it just a little harder to get you connected with the application and the e-checks and the previous reporting that has happened in the system. If you've created a Fluid Review account for other grants or applications, you will already have an account in the system, so we can just work together. Just feel free to reach out to me directly via email. Next slide, please. So once you register for an account on Fluid Review, you will be taken to your user dashboard. On your user dashboard, you will be required to first complete the organizational details. The organizational details will allow you to enter the primary owner information as well as the organization information. All the organization information will then automatically pull into your eligibility check and into other forms later on. This is also the area that you won't like to update if you're taking over an account, just to make sure it has the most updated information. Also, if you've had any changes in your organization, you will want to check your organizational details to just make sure they're the most up-to-date for 2021 applying. Once you have completed organizational details and it shows complete, you will then be able to do view grant programs. Once you view grant programs, you'll be able to choose one program to apply for. And once you click the program you're applying for, it will take you to the eligibility check. If you are not seeing any viewable grant programs, please reach out to me and I'll be able to see what's occurring in the system. Maybe it's that you have another grant open and it's not allowing you to create a new submission. So we'll work on that together, but feel free to reach out via email if you're having that issue. Dan, next slide, please. So this is the Fluid Review eligibility form. So as you can see, the Fluid Review eligibility form is very simple. It will walk you through each required task that needs to be completed. You should start with first the eligibility form, because the eligibility form will, like I said previously, complete all the organizational detail information that you've added, but it also will let the system know if you are a previous recipient of a grant, and it won't require all the other tasks. So as you can see in this eligibility form, on the right-hand side, you will be able to see the progress on your eligibility form. And if you're at 0%, that means you have not completed any of the tasks. As you complete the task, the progress will change and will show you on the right-hand side how far you have to go and what you need to do, what tasks you will need to complete to be able to submit. Once your progress shows 100%, that means your eligibility check is ready to submit, and you just press submit at the bottom. It's a green button. Once you've submitted, you will receive an email from Fluid Review saying that CEC has received your eligibility check and that it will take a few weeks for us to process it. But once we've processed your e-check and we've found you either eligible or ineligible for the programs, you will receive another email from us, allowing you to know your updated status. If you are eligible to continue to the application stage and you're a project support 1, you will receive your maximum request amount in that email. If you are project support 2 and are eligible to apply, you will receive your maximum request amount of $5,000. Dan, next slide. So that was pretty much the Fluid Review portion of the conversation of the webinar, but here are the key takeaways from the overall webinar that you've seen today. Start now. So as Dan has mentioned, the deadline for eligibility check is June 25th by 4:30 p.m. So the best thing to do is just to start right now, even if it's just starting the eligibility form and coming back to it later. It's really quick and easy, and if you are a previous recipient of a grant in 2020 or 2019, it will be a pretty short and quick eligibility check to complete. You will want to set up your account for the online application reporting system, which is cac.fluidreview.com. Review the program guidelines and application, which you can find on our website at cacgrants.org. The guidelines for the program are also on Fluid Review as well, and you can find that under the resources section of the site. You will need, if you're applying for Project Support 1, you're going to need to complete your organization's cultural data profile, as Dan shared previously. And then you're going to complete your eligibility check before June 25th, 2020 by 4:30 p.m. That's the most important thing. If you are having any issues or having any problems, please reach out to a program manager. If it's anything, a problem or a technical assistant issue with Fluid Review, please reach out directly to me. Dan, next slide. So our final notes is that this is the way to contact us. We are available currently right now via email, as all of us are actually working from home currently due to COVID-19. Additional resources, we do have guides, videos, and tip sheets on our website at cacgrants.org. Grant programs, under grant programs. Since we are a public agency, all of our records, including applications, previous panel reviews, are public records. You can reach out directly to us to request a public record of your application or panel review, or you can go directly on our website to review your panel review as well. Make sure to go to the SMU Data Arts Help Desk if you need any help with your cultural data profile. And then we will be having online Q&A sessions as well.
So if there's any questions from anybody, again, that chat box is there. You can enter your questions there. This will give it a couple minutes. But we also just want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your interest in our grant programs today. And yeah, as India mentioned, we're all working from home. I don't know if you could tell from our video here, but it's a new situation for all of us, but I think we're all looking forward to finding ways to connect with you all this summer and learn about you and your work and your organizations going forward, even if we can't do it in person.
And one additional note, the grant program Q&A will be May 21st. That's a Thursday at 9 a.m.
And the way that those are set up is you can come with a question. We'll be on Zoom and you can ask questions. And as soon as your question is answered, you can leave, or you can stay around to hear what other people are asking about the eligibility check.
So I see there's a question, Devin. Just to be clear, you do not support fiscally sponsored organizations. That's correct. If your organization does not have its own 501c3 status, it's not eligible for a project support grant. Project support grants can only be made to organizations that have their own 501c3 status. Some of those other funding opportunities that Luis mentioned through Neighborhood Connections or through IOBI, which I think actually your organization is able to take advantage of the IOBI matching program. Those are open to organizations that may not have their own 501c3 status. But yeah, to be clear, project support is only open to 501c3 organizations. If you are in the process of obtaining your organization's 501c3 status, reach out to us because we may still be able to work with you. Some of it just depends on the timing of when you get that determination letter. But we have had organizations that started the application process without having that determination letter, but were able to receive it by the time of the application, when the application was due in August. So if you're in that situation, we still want to work with you. We still want to hear from you, and please just reach out to us. Thanks for that question.
I also want to reference that within the eligibility criteria, it says that as an organization, you had to be established for about a year. That's not the date that you received your 501c3 nonprofit status. That could be, when we're saying a year, it has to be you've started to do programming. So if you were a community group that has been doing program for 5 years and just about 3 months ago, you got the nonprofit status, you would be considered eligible for that criteria. Mhm.
Cool. Any other questions or any other last pearls of wisdom from Luis or India or me?
I was just going to say that we are accessible by email, but if you need to talk to us, we do have a way of getting a hold of you, either through Google Voice, Zoom, or freeconferencecall.com. So there's a way that you can get a hold of us through the telephone if email is not the best way to ask a question or get information from us.
Cool. All right, so we have been recording this, so we're going to make it available as a recording for all of you who attended today, and we're also going to put it online for anybody who wasn't able to join us live. So you can refer back to this as a resource. Our contact information again is up there, so as Luis said, please reach out to us with any questions. And then keep an eye out for information about those online Q&A sessions. Again, this is all new for us, but we're looking forward to finding ways to connect with you and answer your questions and be supportive of you throughout this application process. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.